Hi, this is Pastor Diana White, pastor of Covenant Community Church. This is, episode 3, but part 2 of a sermon series that we're doing at our church called We Make the Road by Walking, based on a book by Brian McLaren. Today, I'm going to talk to you about the Genesis 2 creation narrative and about how it's important to sometimes have more than one story to tell about someone or something or somewhere, to give us a fullness of a picture. Genesis 2 is a story in the Bible that I really didn't ever notice. You see, when I was growing up, I thought that there was only one creation story in the Bible. I assumed that shoved in there somewhere in the 6 days of creation was where Adam was formed out of the dust of the earth, and surely somewhere in there, Eve was created from a rib. I don't know where I expected the trees in the garden to be, but I had no idea that there were two creation narratives written by two groups of people told at very different times in history in different places. So, the danger of telling one story. There is a speaker called Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. I'm saying that wrong, I'm sure. She tells in one of her TED Talks about this danger of a single story. You see, she is from Nigeria, and she also went to university or college in the United States when she was 19. And so she comes from a diverse background from a continent that is of diverse people and diverse countries and diverse tribes and diverse languages. Yet she tells personal stories of how the single story has affected her outlook in life and how people have looked at her. So, growing up, she had a mother who was an administrator and a father who was a professor. So she lived a cushy, upper middle class life with live-in domestic help that only I could dream of. And there she had this little houseboy named Fide. And she tells stories of how she felt so much pity for Fide and his family, because her mother would always say, oh, how poor Fide was, and how we need to send food to Fide's family, give him clothes, finish your food, appreciate you have food, unlike Fide's family. So there was a day that they went to his village in Nigeria to visit Fide and his family. And there they saw this beautiful ornate basket that Fide's brother had made. And Chimamanda was so startled and thinking, wow, I did not know that someone poor could make something so beautiful. It had been impossible for her to think of Fide and his family as anything but poor. So this idea of the danger of one story became even more real to her when she left to go to college years later. And her American roommate said to her, how did you learn to speak English so well? And she was confused when Chimamanda said, well, Nigeria happens to have English as the official language. And then the roommate said, oh, can I please listen to your tribal music? And that roommate was very disappointed when Chimamanda got out a tape of Mariah Carey. She didn't really know much about Africa. All she knew was that she pitied her somewhat. And she thought that Africa, like many of us think, has a single story. The story of catastrophe, the story of AIDS, poverty, illness, famine. They couldn't think. Sometimes we can't possibly think of Africa as a very complex system of complex people from different socioeconomic backgrounds, different religions, just like in our own country. We often try to have just one story of the creation narrative, but it's much more complicated than that. You see, the Bible is a collection of diverse stories, diverse kinds of literature, all added together to try to give us a picture of who God is and who God wants us to be. In this Genesis 2 narrative, we hear a more ancient telling of this story of creation, and it's a story where humanity is more central. In this story, we hear about man being created from dust from the ground, giving air in his nostrils to breathe, therefore becoming a human living being. We hear about 2 trees being planted within the garden, one called the tree of life, and the other one, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Now, in these trees, God says, okay, y'all can have anything you need in this garden. All of this is good. All of this is created, and all of it is for you to enjoy. Yet I have this one rule. I need you to never, ever, ever touch or eat from that knowledge of good and evil. And as we know later on, because we've read the rest of the story, the people can't resist. And even though God says this tree will bring you death, they go for it. They take a chance, just like a kid taking a chance touching a hot burner on a stovetop. In this chance, humanity decides to live a life in death. What does living a life in death look like for us today? Sometimes when we feel distant from God, might it be from our own choosing or from our own circumstances, or things that are even out of our control. Living a life of death can be living controlled by an addiction, living a life where we are controlled by other abusers, living a life where we have no hope and feel like we have no purpose here in this creation. So it continues with this first human we call Adam. He has all these animals around him, and none of them really satisfy what he needs, and having a relationship and having someone to talk to and someone to be intimate with. And so God takes from him a rib, or in some other translations it says a side, and to him this is a gift of another person to do life with. And we hear these famous words of, this is now the bone of my bones, the flesh of my flesh. She's called woman because she was taken out of man. And then at the end it says they were both naked and they felt no shame. I really pause at that 25th verse. When I was younger, I paused because we got to, say the word naked at church, and we got to color pictures where Adam and Eve were hiding behind bushes. But it says something so much more powerful. They felt no shame. Shame is something that we have carried with us as humanity from the beginning of time. Shame is something that drags us down into living in lives of death. Shame is a thing that makes us hate ourselves, hate others, not consider ourselves to really be created in the image of God, consider others enemy. Shame is a thing that keeps us from being in intimate relationships. Shame keeps us from treating our bodies in a healthy way. Shame makes us feel like our life or life in general is just not worth it. We know because, again, we've read more into the story that there is redemption for these people who make bad decisions from the beginning, like we do each day. This redemption that we will someday, that we will hear about later in the New Testament through the second Adam, through Jesus Christ, who takes away shame. Jesus Christ, who makes us a new creation. We hear of another story of from dust to dust, ashes to ashes and dust to dust. We hear this story in Ash Wednesday as we enter into a Holy Week, into a Lenten season, and then to a Holy Week where we pause and think about, yes, we are people who mess up often, but we are made whole by God who creates us and through redemption in God's Son. Take time this week to look again at Genesis 2 and think of the places where Genesis 1 would just be a story half told if it wasn't for a different perspective from a different person in a different time. Also, as you relate to others around you, remember that they are each created in the image of God. They will all tell their own story. And even if it's different from your own, that does not make it inherently bad. Sometimes different stories and perspectives just gives us a more full image of God, our Creator. Go in peace.